If someone told you the planet of Glarion was the jewel of the galaxy, they were either trying to sell you something or too drunk to remember the last time they tripped over their own drool. Sure, it hosted the prestigious intergalactic games, but that was like saying a junkyard was a treasure trove because it occasionally held valuable scrap. Right now, that gem was cracking, literally, and no amount of galactic glue was going to hold it together. Revo Calax stood at the edge of the stadium, staring at the swirling mess of chaos that was the collapsing shield wall. "Look at that," he said, gesturing with the universal sign for "I'm screwed." "It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, but with more sparks and a higher chance of obliteration." Zelterquib, an alien competitor with more limbs than sense, stood beside him. "Ah yes, the famed human optimism. I love the smell of impending doom in the morning. You have mornings where you're from?" Revo asked, eyebrows raised. "Only on weekends," Zelter replied, grinning with a mouthful of disturbingly sharp teeth. "Any idea how we're supposed to compete in the games with that thing ready to collapse and turn us all into interstellar roadkill?" Revo shrugged. "Adapt and survive, right? They say humans are good at that." "I mean, we did manage to make a thriving culture out of reality TV and fast food." Revo shifted his weight, the dust of the arena swirling around his feet like a metaphor for his life, unstable, constantly shifting, and prone to getting in inconvenient places. "What about the shield wall?" Zelter asked, a hint of actual concern threading through his sarcasm. "Same as everything else in life, I suppose. Hope it holds long enough to finish what we started, then pray like hell it doesn't blow us to pieces." Revo squinted at the malfunctioning barrier, which was now flickering like an underpaid nightclub strobe. "Besides, it's not like the games can be stopped. Too much money involved, and we can't let down the sponsors. You know how they get. They'd rather see us all die a spectacularly televised death than miss out on advertising revenue." Zelter nodded, as if they were discussing the weather. "That is some reassuring human spirit right there. Remind me to stick close to you when the wall comes crashing down. I want a front row seat to your survival antics." Revo chuckled, partly because he was genuinely amused, mostly because there wasn't much else to do. "Say what you want about us. We may be messy, unpredictable, and prone to screwing things up royally, but we know how to put on a show." A loud crack echoed through the sky, making both competitors flinch. The shield wall shimmered, a patchwork hologram of imminent catastrophe. Somewhere out of sight, metal met metal with a shriek that suggested premeditated murder. "What do you think happens if that really falls?" Zelter asked, his bravado slipping just a little. His eyes flicked to the stands, already filling with spectators blissfully unaware of the risk they were taking by sitting in the nosebleeds. Revo rubbed his chin. "Oh, the usual. Panic, chaos, maybe some looting if we're lucky. And if we're really lucky, the organizers will find a way to blame us for it." "Us," Zelter echoed. Revo tapped the side of his nose. "Humans, we're good scapegoats. Been practicing for eons." A siren wailed, as if on cue, followed by the voice of an announcer trying very hard to sound reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. A minor technical issue with the shield wall is being addressed. The games will proceed as planned. I'm sure they'll fix it using the same expertise that landed us in this mess to begin with," Revo muttered, earning a snort from Zelter. Another competitor, a towering insectoid named Kriz, scuttled over. "You two hear about the shield wall, what gave it away? The sound of impending doom or the flickering death trap looming over us?" Revo replied dryly. Kriz tapped his mandibles thoughtfully. "I heard they're bringing in a specialist from Earth, some kind of genius engineer." Zelter rolled his eyes. "Oh great, a human engineer. Does that mean we get to test the theory of whether two wrongs make a right?" Revo shrugged. "Can't be worse than what we've got now. If it were, they'd have marketed it as a feature." A rumble shook the ground again, and this time the shield wall let out a noise like a dying beast. Revo and Zelter exchanged a look, the kind that said, "Should we start running now?" "Well," Revo said, clapping Zelter on one of his many shoulders. "If nothing else, it'll be a story to tell. Assuming we survive it," Zelter replied, but he was grinning again, that wide alien grin that suggested he was enjoying the gallows humor as much as the situation allowed. Revo looked towards the sky, where the shield wall flickered ominously. "Here's hoping. Though if I had to choose a way to go, at least this one comes with a front row seat to the biggest cosmic fireworks show this side of the Andromeda." As the game's officials scrambled around like headless chickens with too much responsibility, Revo and Zelter decided to do the only logical thing. They headed to the nearest bar. After all, if the world was ending, they might as well end it with a drink, or several. The bar was packed with competitors and spectators alike, all buzzing with the kind of nervous energy that came from knowing you were in grave danger but too far in to care. There was laughter, shouting, and the unmistakable clink of glasses. Revo elbowed his way to the counter, ordering a drink that glowed an unsettling shade of radioactive green. "To the games," he said, raising his glass. and to the poor sods who were too busy betting on us to notice the walls are falling down, Zelter raised his own drink, a concoction that smoked ominously, to the folks who think tomorrow is guaranteed. May their ignorance be blissful, at least until it's not. They drank, the burn of the alcohol almost as comforting as the shared camaraderie. You know, Zelter said after a moment, it's kind of nice to be with someone who doesn't panic at the first sign of trouble. Revo gave a lopsided grin. Panic is for people who think they can change things by worrying. I prefer to leave that to the professionals. They both turned as another tremor rocked the bar, the lights flickering ominously. You think they'll figure it out? Zelter asked, not bothering to specify who they were. Not a chance, Revo replied cheerfully, but I'm betting they'll give it a hell of a try. As the bar's patrons laughed nervously and the drinks kept flowing, Revo took a moment to look around. The room was filled with faces of every conceivable species, all unified by the shared understanding that life was short, unpredictable, and often absurd. And yet, it was in these moments of shared uncertainty that something like hope found a foothold. Not the bright, shiny hope of fairy tales, but the kind that was forged in the crucible of shared hardship and grim determination. Revo raised his glass one more time, catching Zelter's eye. To tomorrow, he said. Zelter nodded. Whatever it brings, the ceiling shuddered, a cloud of dust floating down like a reminder of their precarious situation. But for now, they ignored it, choosing instead to enjoy the moment, uncertain of what the next would bring but determined to face it head-on. And somewhere beyond the fractured shield wall, the universe continued on, indifferent and vast, as the intergalactic games waited for their curtain to rise. As the sun, or whatever passed for it on Glarion, began its lazy arc over the sky, a sense of impending doom hung over the stadium like an uninvited houseguest. The shield wall, that glimmering tapestry of incompetence and misplaced trust, seemed to be holding itself together through sheer spite alone, kind of like Revo's first marriage if he thought about it, which he didn't because there was enough suffering here in the present. The announcer's voice droned on in that unconvincing tone found in all failed salesmen. Ladies and gentlemen, the games are set to begin. Please remain calm and enjoy the spectacle. The crowd's energy oscillated between eager anticipation and a kind of restrained terror, like they were watching their favorite team play on the rim of a volcano. Revo scanned the stands, noting the diversity of the spectators. There was the usual array of aliens, each looking more bizarre than the last, as though the universe had decided to host a costume party and forgot to send out a theme. Zelter, still nursing the aftereffects of their earlier liquid courage session, sidled up to Revo, his many limbs twitching with nerves or excitement, or both. Think they'll start before the shield decides to introduce us to the vacuum of space. Place your bets, Revo replied, dry as a desert bone. Odds are 50-50 on an early exit. As if on cue, the shield wall emitted a noise somewhere between a groan and a whimper. Revo wondered if metal could have an existential crisis. If so, the shield was definitely considering its life choices. Zelter glanced at the other human competitors gathered near the start line, a motley crew of optimism and misplaced confidence. Your kind has a reputation, you know. Brilliant engineers, galactic saviors, Revo asked with a smirk. Unpredictable lunatics with a knack for self-sacrifice, Zelter corrected, a tentacle gesticulating wildly, nearly knocking over a Herogen who grunted in annoyance. Ah, yes. The old throw oneself into the fire to see if it's hot routine. Revo watched the humans, athletes who had trained their whole lives for this moment, yet who might find themselves running for survival instead of glory. The thought was both amusing and tragic. Do you actually think any of you can fix that thing? Zelter asked, eyeing the flickering shield wall with distaste. We've got a saying back home, if you can't fix it, feature it. Revo raised an eyebrow, and if it turns out we're all doomed, at least we'll have a universal laughingstock to remember us by. The games officially started with a blaring trumpet sound, a signal as welcomed as a tax audit. The crowd roared in response, a collective cry that was part enthusiasm, part I hope I don't die today. The first event, the Intergalactic Relay, a classic. Competitors from across the galaxy lined up, each eager to display their species' unique talents. The humans stood apart, their expressions a mix of determination and the dawning realization that they might be sprinting for their lives rather than a medal. We've got this, Revo muttered to the nearest human competitor, a wiry woman named Dara, who looked like she'd been carved from a block of determination and caffeinated resolve. Are you talking about the race or the potential for imminent death? Dara asked, her eyes locked on the track. Both really, Revo said. Just keep running and whatever happens, try not to look up. A buzzer sounded and they were off. Legs pumping, hearts pounding, a blur of color and species as the competitors surged forward. The ground beneath them rumbled ominously, as if the planet itself was a bit too invested in the outcome. Revo watched as the humans wove through the chaos, their movements a testament to the fact that while they might not be the fastest or the strongest, they were damn well the most stubborn. It was like watching a nature documentary on the resilience of cockroaches. "There they go," Zelter muttered, his eyes widening as he watched the humans maneuver through the track. Like a bunch of caffeinated maniacs, the shield wall crackled again, this time with a spectacular flash that drew gasps from the crowd. It was as if the universe had decided to add special effects to an already dramatic show. Revo couldn't help but think that the whole place was one bad decision away from becoming a crater. What happens if the shield fails completely? Zelter asked, genuine curiosity laced with an undertone of, and how screwed are we? Best case scenario, we all get a quick introduction to the harsh realities of space. Worst case, we survive long enough to remember how bad an idea this all was. Zelter shook his head. "I don't get your species, always jumping into things without a second thought." Revo shrugged. "Call it optimism, or stupidity. The line's pretty blurry." The relay continued, with the humans holding their own, their adaptability proving useful as the track shifted beneath them in strange, unpredictable ways. Chaos had an odd way of leveling the playing field, much to the dismay of the more traditionally athletic species. "They're doing it," Zelter said, a note of reluctant admiration in his voice. "You humans and your crazy plans. Survival is a hell of a motivator," Revo replied, watching as Dara passed the baton to the next runner. "And if the plan fails, there's always plan B, C, or D. We've got the whole damn alphabet." A sudden, louder crack echoed through the stadium, a harbinger of malfunction and impending disaster. This time, the shield wall buckled visibly, sending a ripple of panic through the spectators. Revo felt the ground shudder beneath him, the vibration running up his legs like a prelude to something much, much worse. The announcer's voice cut through the chaos, urging calm, his words increasingly ignored by a crowd edging towards hysteria. "Looks like the shield's making decisions for us now," Zelter said, his voice losing some of its sarcastic edge. "Well, nothing like a bit of existential dread to liven up a sporting event," Revo replied, even as he watched the human runners continue, undeterred by the threat looming above them. The race concluded, the humans managing to finish respectably, though the applause was tepid, overshadowed by the looming threat of structural collapse. The announcer, desperately trying to project calm, announced the next event in a voice that cracked with stress. Revo shook his head. "They really think this is going to distract everyone from the apocalypse, humans and their blind faith," Zelter said, shaking his head. "You'd almost admire it if it weren't so terrifying." "It's a gift," Revo admitted, watching as the competitors prepared for the next event, a bizarre obstacle course that looked like it had been designed by a committee of sadists and architects with a grudge against physics. As the participants took their positions, the shield wall let out another unsettling noise, this time accompanied by a cascade of sparks that fell like fiery rain. The crowd gasped collectively, the tension tight enough to snap. Revo turned to address the other human competitors, his voice carrying the weight of one who had seen enough disasters to recognize the onset of a new one. "All right, folks, you know the drill. Head down, keep moving, and don't think too hard about the imminent disintegration of reality." Dara, still breathless from the relay, nodded. "Sounds like college all over again," Revo grinned. "Exactly, only with less debt and more odds of dying horribly." Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a shared chuckle among the humans. Gallows humor, Revo reflected, was a universal human trait, a coping mechanism honed over centuries of navigating a world determined to throw curveballs and disasters with alarming frequency. The obstacle course began with a chaotic blast of noise and activity, the competitors launching themselves into the fray. Revo watched as the humans adapted to the whims of the course, their movements a testament to survival instincts dressed up as athletic prowess. Zelter watched alongside him, his expression a mix of bemusement and begrudging respect. "You really think they'll hold it together?" Revo shrugged, his gaze on the obstacle course, where the humans were ducking, weaving, and occasionally crashing with a kind of reckless abandon. "If we don't, we'll at least make it entertaining." The shield wall creaked again, a sound like the universe's largest door being slowly unhinged. Revo could almost sense the planet holding its breath, waiting to see if the worst was yet to come. Zelter shook his head, one of his many appendages tapping restlessly against his side. "And here I thought you humans were all about saving yourselves. Sometimes running towards the danger is the only way to get out of it," Revo replied, eyes scanning the course. He watched as Dara narrowly avoided a collapsing hurdle, her agility a testament to years of practice and the human talent for narrowly avoiding disaster. The course was a whirl of activity, a spectacle of determination and desperation, as the competitors pushed themselves to their limits, some for glory, others simply to survive the next few minutes. "Your species really does thrive on chaos, don't you?" Zelter observed, a hint of admiration threading through his skepticism. Revo chuckled, a low, grim sound that carried the weight of understanding. Chaos is just another word for opportunity. With a final burst of energy, the humans crossed the finish line, their faces a mix of triumph and relief. The cheers from the crowd were subdued, though still present, overshadowed by the ominous flicker of the shield wall. As the competitors regrouped, Revo took a moment to look around, to see the faces of those who were as much comrades as they were rivals in this insane endeavor. He saw fear, yes, but also a grim determination that was uniquely human. "We'll get through this," Revo said, his voice carrying a confidence he only half felt. "We've handled worse. Care to share some of those reassuring human stories of survival?" Zelter asked, his sarcasm tempered with curiosity. Revo grinned, a fierce, defiant smile. "Let's just say we've dealt with collapsing empires, rogue AI, and intergalactic creditors. A malfunctioning shield wall. Just another Tuesday." As the day wore on, the atmosphere remained charged with a nervous energy, the specter of the crumbling shield wall casting a long shadow over the proceedings. Yet, through it all, the games continued, a testament to stubbornness and the refusal to yield in the face of oblivion. And somewhere beyond the chaos, the universe watched, indifferent and vast, as humanity and its allies danced on the edge of disaster, determined to hold on for as long as they could. The stadium felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation and impending doom. The shield wall was doing its best impression of an old light bulb on its last flicker, casting an eerie, stuttering glow over the frenzied audience. The Glarion sun, already having given up on the whole providing warmth and light gig, was now being obscured by thick, roiling clouds that had no business existing in a place like this. "Great, now it's gonna rain," Revo muttered, squinting up at the angry sky as if challenging it to do its worst. Beside him, Zelter was furiously tapping away on a device that looked like a cross between a calculator and a paperweight. "I didn't sign up for weather," Zelter grumbled, one of his numerous limbs gesturing vaguely towards the sky. "What's next? Locusts. Wouldn't be the weirdest thing today," Revo replied, flashing a grin that was 2 parts confidence, 1 part sheer madness. "But hey, at least it'll make for a memorable games. Remember the year the stadium tried to murder everyone?" Zelter shot him a look that was a mix of exasperation and reluctant admiration. "Your optimism is disturbing. I prefer to call it strategic denial." Revo clapped a hand on Zelter's shoulder, or at least where he assumed a shoulder should be in all those limbs. "Anyway, enough chit-chat. Time to rally the troops." The stadium was a cacophony of varied species, all contributing to the general chaos with their unique versions of panic. Revo navigated through the crowd like a captain steering his ship through a storm, his eyes scanning for familiar faces. He found Dara huddled with the other human competitors, her expression a mixture of determination and "why am I always in the wrong place at the wrong time?" "All right, team," Revo announced, drawing their attention. "You've got a bit of a situation. You mean the impending weather apocalypse or the fact that this thing is going to blow any second?" Dara quipped, her voice dry as the Glarion desert, or at least what it used to be before the whole spontaneous weather phenomena. "Both, actually. But that's what makes it fun, right?" Revo leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Here's the plan. We adapt. "That's it," one of the other humans, a burly guy named Max, frowned. "I was hoping for something a bit more plan-like. Adapt really fast," Revo clarified, flashing a grin that suggested he might just be off his rocker. "Listen, we've got an edge here. While everyone else is losing their minds, we're gonna keep our heads on straight, or what's left of them," Dara added. "Exactly. Now I've been thinking." "That's dangerous," Zelter interjected, having followed Revo through the crowd. "True, but hear me out. We need to use this chaos to our advantage. If the weather keeps up, it's gonna mess with visibility, footing, everything. So we need to be unpredictable, flexible, and maybe a little bit insane. Good thing we've got you for that last part," Dara said, earning a few laughs from the group. "Thanks for the vote of confidence. Look, if the course changes, we change with it. We improvise. It's what humans do best." Max crossed his arms, considering. "So chaos is our friend, more like a mildly abusive roommate we've learned to live with," Revo replied. "But yes, something like that." A low rumble shook the ground, a reminder that the universe wasn't done with its game of cosmic brinkmanship. The shield wall crackled ominously, a sound that was fast becoming the background score for the day's insanity. "All right," Revo continued, clapping his hands together to refocus the group. "First things first, we need a distraction." Dara raised an eyebrow. "You volunteering?" "Not exactly, but I've got an idea." "Zelter, remember that little incident with the fireworks last year?" Zelter's eyes widened, a mischievous glint appearing. "You mean the one where we accidentally set fire to the ambassador's ship?" "Yeah, that one. Think you can recreate the distraction without the incineration?" Zelter considered, his multiple limbs tapping in an unconscious rhythm of calculation. "I might be able to rig something up. Give me 10 minutes and a clear shot." "Perfect." We'll need all the eyes on something other than the track for a bit, Revo explained, his mind already spinning with possibilities. As Zelter scuttled off to enact whatever pyrotechnic wizardry he had planned, Revo turned back to his team. Okay, as soon as we've got some chaos, we move. Stick to the plan or lack thereof. Remember, the goal isn't just to win, it's to survive, Dara snorted. Winning's kind of hard when you're dead, exactly. So let's make sure we're alive to argue about the results later. Above them, the clouds continued to gather, heavy and dark, promising a downpour that would make even the hardiest of planets reconsider its life choices. The spectators were still buzzing, their attention torn between the competitors and the sky's impending tantrum. Revo took a deep breath, the air thick with ozone and tension. All right, folks, time to show this universe just how crazy humans can be. As if on cue, a loud bang reverberated through the stadium, followed by a cascade of multicolored lights streaking across the sky. Zelter had outdone himself, creating a spectacle that made even the most jaded of spectators look skyward in awe and confusion. Let's move, Revo shouted, taking the lead as his team sprang into action. They hit the track as the first raindrops began to fall, large and cold, turning the surface into a treacherous mix of mud and chaos. The alien competitors floundered, their training ill-prepared for such spontaneous disasters, but the humans, they thrived. Revo watched as Dara zigzagged through the obstacles with a kind of reckless grace, her movements a testament to a lifetime of dodging life's curveballs. Max plowed through with brute force, parting the chaos like a ship through stormy seas. Rain, rain, go away, Revo sang, mostly to himself, as he vaulted over a barrier that had turned into a slippery death trap thanks to the unexpected weather. The course twisted and writhed under the onslaught of water, yet the humans adapted, their movements a blend of instinct and improvisation. A hurdle collapsed under the deluge, and Revo barely managed to leap over the wreckage, landing with a squelch that nearly took out his legs from under him. Around him, the air was filled with the sounds of slipping, sliding, and the occasional colorful curse, mostly from the alien competitors who hadn't quite grasped the concept of go with the flow. This is insane, Zelter yelled, somehow keeping pace despite his physiology being better suited to dry land. You're telling me, Revo shot back, his voice barely carrying over the storm's roar. But isn't it fun? Your definition of fun needs an update, Zelter replied, but there was no denying the glint of excitement in his many eyes. The shield wall was now more of a suggestion than a reality, its flickering lights a ghostly reminder of just how little separated them from the void beyond. Yet amidst the chaos, the crowd was roaring, part fear, part exhilaration, as they witnessed an event that was rapidly becoming the stuff of legend. Revo could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, a mix of fear and ecstasy that was as addictive as it was terrifying. This was what it meant to be human, he thought, a constant battle against the odds, with a touch of madness thrown in for good measure. As they rounded the final bend, the finish line came into view, nothing more than a vague promise through the sheets of rain. Revo pushed himself harder, drawing on reserves he didn't know he had, his body moving on pure instinct. Dara was there beside him, matching his pace, her eyes locked on the goal. Together, they surged forward, a testament to stubbornness and sheer bloody-mindedness. They crossed the line in a flurry of mud and triumph, their victory a fleeting moment of clarity amidst the chaos. The crowd's roar was a wave of noise that washed over them, a tsunami of relief and celebration. Zelter caught up, panting and dripping, but irresistibly grinning. Well, that was something. Welcome to a day in the life of human, Revo replied, wiping rain and mud from his face. It's a miracle you haven't all killed yourselves off yet, Zelter noted wryly, though the admiration in his voice was unmistakable. Not for lack of trying, Dara chimed in, still catching her breath. The rest of the team gathered around, their expressions a mix of disbelief and elation. They'd done it, they'd survived, at least for now, and maybe even achieved something more. As the rain continued to pour and the shield wall flickered uncertainly, Revo looked at his team, a ragtag bunch of survivors who'd turned disaster into opportunity. They might be standing on the brink of oblivion, but they were standing together. Not a bad day's work, Revo said, his voice carrying a note of pride tempered with the knowledge that the day was far from over. Incredible, Zelter agreed, shaking his head in awe. What's next? Revo grinned, a wild, fearless grin that dared the universe to throw its worst. Next, we keep going. After all, there's always Plan B. As the storm raged on and the universe continued its indifferent watch, the humans and their allies stood ready, defiant, and unyielding, determined to face whatever came next with courage and a healthy dose of insanity. The stadium was a mess. Not the kind of mess you could ignore by averting your eyes or pretending it didn't exist. This was the kind of mess that demanded attention, like a planetary disaster or a political scandal. The flickering shield wall was practically begging to be put out of its misery, but much like the games, it soldiered on, unwanted yet inevitable. The organizers, in a move that screamed both desperation and wishful thinking, decided to implement emergency measures. This was corporate speak for let's slap a band-aid on this gaping wound and pray no one notices the blood. Revo leaned on the railing, watching the chaos unfold below. The announcement crackled over the speakers, the sound of a voice trying to maintain composure while everything fell apart. Attention, esteemed competitors and tax auditors. Due to unforeseen meteorological events, the games will continue with minor adjustments, minor adjustments. Dara snorted next to him, brushing the mud from her uniform. That's one way to put it, yeah, like telling someone their planet's just experienced a minor quake, Revo replied, rolling his eyes. Zelter sauntered over, still dripping from the rain. His extra limbs gave him the appearance of a particularly disgruntled octopus, one that had lost a battle with a blender. Looks like you humans have caused quite the stir. Hey, we didn't order the storm, Revo said, holding up his hands defensively. Just making the most of it. Yeah, well, now the other teams are looking at us like we're the reason their sandwiches got soggy, Zelter said, flapping a wet appendage for emphasis. The tension was palpable. The human team, now labeled as both Chaos Incarnate and the luckiest bastards this side of the galaxy, faced scrutiny from every corner of the stadium. They were a target, pinned by the glares of competitors who hadn't quite figured out that sometimes the universe just didn't give a damn about fairness. Max joined the trio, his expression a mix of annoyance and amusement. Anyone else get the feeling we're the main course at an all-you-can-eat blame buffet? Probably because we are, Dara said, her tone as dry as she wished her clothes were. But that's what happens when you don't sit quietly and accept the universe's crap. Speaking of which, Zelter said, tapping his device, a cross between a calculator and a paperweight that seemed to do everything but make sense. I might have, accidentally triggered a few more fireworks. You know, for morale, Revo raised an eyebrow. For morale, Zelter shrugged, or at least did the closest approximation to a shrug his anatomy allowed. Figured it'd keep things lively. Guess I should have checked if those were the diplomatic variety. The diplomatic variety in Zelter's world meant explosives that could cause international incidents. The sky above the stadium was now a tapestry of color and noise, a visual metaphor for the chaos below. Waves of concern rippled through the crowd, and Revo could almost feel the collective "oh" for the love of emanating from the tournament organizers. Revo grinned because of course he did. Well, if we're gonna crash and burn, might as well do it with style. Great plan, Max said, sarcasm dripping from his words. Got any others? Actually, yeah, Revo replied, his eyes gleaming with the kind of madness only the truly desperate or truly inspired possessed. We turned this circus into a unifying moment. Dara blinked. You finally lost it. No, seriously. Hear me out. Everyone's freaking out, right? We're public enemy number one because we thrive in chaos. Revo gestured broadly at the mess around them. What if we use that? What if we show them there's another way to handle this? You mean like a Kumbaya moment? Zelter asked, his expression somewhere between intrigue and skepticism. More like we're all screwed, so let's get screwed together kinda moment, Revo clarified. We use the games to unify everyone. Show them humans can be more than just the universe's punching bags, Max snorted. That's a tall order. You're talking about getting rivals to cooperate. Exactly, Revo said, his voice rising with enthusiasm. We set an event, something impossible that no single species can do alone. We make it a challenge that demands cooperation, and when that goes sideways, Dara asked, though there was a hint of a smirk tugging at her lips. We'll cross that bridge when it explodes, Revo quipped. But really, what have we got to lose? Pride, dignity, our lives? Zelter ticked off on his fingers, then sighed. But what the hell, I'm in. It's not like my reputation can get any worse. Great, then let's get to work. Revo clapped Zelter on the back, nearly toppling him over. We've got a galaxy to convince. As they moved to enact their plan, the atmosphere in the stadium was one of simmering tension, mixed with a healthy dose of curiosity. The human team, having narrowly escaped catastrophe, now had the audacity to propose something radical. Dara, never one to pass up the chance to needle Revo, leaned in. You realize this could just as easily blow up in our faces, right? Of course, Revo said, his grin unwavering. But that's half the fun. The unifying event, as Revo dubbed it, was a race of sorts. An obstacle course designed by the universe's cruelest committee, nature, malfunctioning tech, and the whims of cosmic irony. It was the kind of challenge that would take every ounce of ingenuity and cooperation to survive, let alone win. The announcement went out over the speakers, Revo's voice booming with enthusiasm that was only slightly forced. Competitors, we're gonna try something different, a challenge that requires cooperation. A chance for you to prove you're more than just species with a grudge. The response was a mix of skepticism and grudging interest. The idea was mad enough to just might work, or at least provide entertainment while everything else burned. The course was set, a nightmare of slippery terrain, broken tech, and the ever-present threat of the shield wall finally giving up the ghost. Teams shuffled together, eyeing each other with suspicion, but also a glimmer of something like hope. "All right, teams," Revo said, taking his position. "Remember, it's not about winning. It's about surviving together. So let's show them what we're made of. More mud than anything else," Dara muttered, but there was a note of anticipation in her voice that matched the others. The race began, not with a bang, but with a collective lurch toward the first obstacle. The initial confusion gave way to a frantic scramble as teams realized the necessity of working together. Humans and aliens alike found themselves helping each other over hurdles, through mire, and around malfunctioning tech that seemed to have developed a sense of humor. Languages meshed into a cacophony of commands, encouragement, and the occasional insult. Revo found himself hauling a particularly stubborn alien out of a mud pit, the creature's gratitude expressed in a series of grunts and a slap on the back that nearly knocked him flat. "See, we're practically best friends now," Revo said, catching his breath. "Lucky you," Dara replied from somewhere nearby, helping a competitor over a tangled mess of wires. "I've got a buddy who thinks yelling louder is a valid strategy." The course twisted and turned, a brutal testament to the harsh reality they all faced. But amidst the chaos, something strange happened. Laughter, cheers, teams were falling apart, yet somehow they were coming together. "Look at that," Zelter called, pointing with one of his many limbs. "They're actually doing it." "Yeah," Revo said, his voice laced with incredulity. "They actually are." The finish line loomed, a soggy blur of mud and rain. Revo pushed onward, feeling a surge of camaraderie with those around him. It was a small moment of triumph in a galaxy that seemed determined to crush them all, but it was enough. They crossed the line, a ragged group of competitors who'd managed to pull off the impossible, if only for a moment. The crowd, now caught up in the spirit of the event, erupted in cheers that echoed through the stadium. Revo stood panting, a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction etched on his face. He glanced at his team, then at the others who'd joined them in this harebrained scheme. "See," he said, a wild grin breaking through the mud and rain. "Humans aren't all bad." "No, just mostly," Zelter replied, but there was a warmth in his tone that belied the sarcasm. Dara brushed the wet hair from her eyes, smirking at Revo. "You might just have made a miracle happen." Revo shrugged, as if miracles were just another day at the office. "All in a day's work," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hope and madness intertwined. As the rain continued its relentless assault and the shield wall flickered on the edge of failure, the competitors stood, united if only for a brief, shining moment. They were survivors, rebels against the odds, and as the storm raged on, they were ready for whatever the universe dared to throw their way next. The Glarion sky was doing its best impersonation of a malfunctioning rave, all flickering lights and unsettling noise. The stadium, an architectural tribute to bureaucratic inefficiency, groaned under the weight of several thousand confused and increasingly testy spectators. And because the universe had a particularly cruel sense of humor, the shield wall was now one flicker away from giving up its ghost completely. Revo Calax stood in the middle of this chaotic maelstrom, thoroughly drenched and grinning like a lunatic. "Well, this is officially the worst day of my life," he declared, sounding bizarrely cheerful about it. Zelter Quib, his alien companion with more limbs than sense, regarded him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You humans have a peculiar way of finding joy in abject misery. Call it strategic denial," Revo quipped, watching as a particularly aggressive gust of wind threatened to launch his hat into orbit. "You should give it a spin sometime. Tempting, but I prefer my denial to be less strategic and more about avoiding responsibility," Zelter replied, tapping away at his device, a misbegotten hybrid between a calculator and a paperweight that seemed determined to confound logic. Nearby, Dara was trying to coax some semblance of order out of the mess, her patience wearing thinner than the shield wall. "We need to get the other teams on board with this plan before everything literally goes to hell," she shouted above the growing cacophony. "Good news is, with the way things are going, hell might be a step up," Max piped in, shaking the rain from his hair like a disgruntled dog. "Bad news is, convincing them might be impossible," Revo shrugged. They were already knee-deep in the muck of impossibility. "Impossible's just a word fools use to make themselves feel better about being quitters," spoken like a true optimist, Dara muttered, her voice as dry as the Sahara before climate change. "More like a stubborn idiot," Max corrected, his cynicism only slightly undercut by a smirk. The three humans and their disgruntled octopus ally moved through the chaos, dodging panicked aliens and malfunctioning drones like a particularly dysfunctional parade. Revo couldn't help but notice the accusatory glares from various corners of the stadium. Apparently, humans had become the universe's favorite scapegoats. "Why do they always blame us when stuff hits the fan?" Revo wondered aloud, dodging a wayward snack vendor's cart. "Probably because you're so good at surviving it," Zelter replied, not unkindly. "You've got that whole cockroach of the galaxy thing going for you. Thanks, I think, Revo replied, deciding to take that as a compliment. Anyway, they're not wrong. We are good at muddling our way through disaster. Then let's muddle faster, Dara said, gesturing towards the chaos with a sense of urgency. The shield wall's about to throw in the towel, and once it does, we'll have a whole new level of catastrophe to deal with. Revo nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. The shield wall, their only defense against the unpredictable weather of Glarion, was now more decorative than functional. Its collapse would turn the stadium into a beautifully ironic death trap. All right, we need to sell this idea of a collaborative event, Revo said, his tone carrying the weight of desperate enthusiasm. Let's get everyone on the same suicidal page. Sure, because getting a stadium full of aliens to cooperate is as easy as herding cats, Dara retorted. Cats that hate each other and are armed with laser pointers. Look, we just need to convince them that working together is in everyone's best interest, Revo reasoned, channeling every motivational speaker he'd ever laughed at. The alternative is scorched earth and soggy bread, appealing, Max said dryly. Now, how do we convince the staunchest rivals that sharing is caring? Revo paused, his mind working overtime. Well, we've got their attention with the storm and the fireworks. Let's give them a reason to stay. Something no one species can tackle alone, like what? Zelter asked, skeptical appendage raised. A synchronized swimming competition in the mud, not a bad idea, but I was thinking something that requires a bit more brain power and a bit less choreography, Revo replied, eyes scanning the chaotic arena. Dara's eyebrows knitted together in thought. What about a series of challenges, ones that need different skills, like strength, smarts, and I dunno, maybe a warped sense of humor? Revo snapped his fingers. Exactly, we make it a series, an interspecies relay. Each team, a mixed bag of aliens and humans, tackles a different leg of the course. Add in a final puzzle that needs everyone's input to solve, Max suggested, joining the brainstorming session. Something that'll force them to talk, even if it's through gritted teeth and the prize, Zelter asked, more for the sake of argument than interest. What do they get for playing nice? Revo grinned, a touch of mischief in his eyes. The pleasure of not getting their asses handed to them by the universe. Charming, Zelter said with a snort, but I suppose it's as good a motivation as any. The four of them hurried to the center of the stadium, where the stragglers of the various teams had gathered, uncertain if they were about to be part of a historic moment or a particularly elaborate prank. Attention, everyone, Revo's voice cut through the din, commanding a focus born of sheer audacity. We've got a proposition for you. The noise subsided, replaced by a chorus of skeptical murmurs. Revo could feel their collective gaze weighing on him, 1,000 pairs of eyes judging the lunatic who dared to ask for unity in the face of impending doom. You've all seen what a mess we're in, Revo continued, gesturing to the flickering shield wall and the tempestuous sky. The games can't continue as planned, not unless we do something radical. Like what? Shouted a voice from the crowd, dripping with distrust. Let you humans sabotage us again, Revo shook his head. No, not sabotage, collaboration. We're proposing an event that requires all of us to work together. A series of challenges that no single species can tackle alone. His words hung in the air, met with a silence that felt heavier than the storm clouds above. Revo could sense the skepticism, the distrust that ran deep among the competitors, but he also sensed an undercurrent of curiosity, the faint glimmer of possibility. You want us to team up? Another voice, this one more curious than accusatory. Why should we trust you? Because staying divided helps no one but the storm, Dara chimed in, her voice steady and convincing. We're all getting soaked, literally and figuratively. If we don't try something different, we're sunk. The crowd murmured amongst themselves, a cacophony of debate and doubt. Revo could feel the tension, the fine line between cooperation and catastrophe. Listen, he said, his tone earnest. I know trusting each other isn't easy, but we've got a chance to turn this mess into something meaningful, to show that we're not just fighters competing for glory, but allies capable of something better. Besides, Zelter added, waving his device as if it were a wand, if we pull this off, it'll make one hell of a story. You'll all be legends. The mention of legacy, of being part of something greater, seemed to resonate with the crowd. Gradually, the grumbling receded, replaced by a cautious sense of optimism. All right, someone finally called out. What's the plan? Revo exhaled, relief washing over him. We start with teams, mixed groups with at least one member of each species. Each team tackles a different segment: strength, intelligence, dexterity, and the final challenge. Asked a particularly spiky alien who looked like it could double as a dangerous houseplant. A puzzle, Max replied, one that needs everyone's input to solve. It's the proverbial key to unlocking our survival, or it could lock us in for good, Zelter quipped. But hey, that's half the fun, right? The crowd buzzed with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, the unholy blend that Revo had hoped for. They were on board, for now at least. Let's get started then, Revo said, clapping his hands with determined enthusiasm. We've got a storm to beat. As the teams began to form, the stadium was abuzz with an energy that felt almost tangible. It was a reckless plan, born out of desperation and stubbornness, but it also carried the faintest whisper of hope, the kind that could either save them or doom them spectacularly. "Think this'll work?" Dara asked, her voice a mix of skepticism and anticipation. Revo grinned, his faith unwavering in the face of absurdity. "I think it's the best bad idea we've ever had. Here's hoping it's not our last," Max added, already moving to organize the human contingent. As the rain continued to fall and the shield wall flickered ominously, the newly formed teams prepared for the challenge of a lifetime. It was a moment of unity amid chaos, a fleeting ember of possibility in a galaxy prone to indifference. "Let's make history," Revo said, his voice carrying over the storm, or at least one hell of a mess. The challenge began with the kind of awkward fumbling that comes from strangers trying to work together under duress. The first leg, a test of strength, saw humans and aliens alike straining against gravity and poor design choices. "Whoever built this course was a sadist," Max grunted as he hoisted a particularly heavy piece of debris with the help of a pair of surprisingly strong tentacles. "That's the spirit," Revo called out from further down the course, helping a diminutive alien over a particularly treacherous patch of mud. "Just think of it as character building or bone breaking," Dara mumbled, assisting a rival team with a tangled mess of wires that had somehow become sentient. The challenge progressed with a chaotic grace, a testament to the stubborn resilience of beings who refused to back down in the face of adversity. Despite the odds, they pressed on, driven by a shared resolve that felt almost palpable. The final challenge, a massive, intricate puzzle, loomed ahead, a tangled web of logic and lateral thinking that would require every ounce of ingenuity they possessed. "All right, everyone," Revo called out, rallying the ragtag assembly of competitors. "This is it. Let's show the universe what we can do when we stop bickering and start building." The puzzle was a complex beast, a monstrous contraption of gears and levers that seemed designed to confound. But as the teams worked together, pooling their knowledge and skills, a strange magic began to unfold. Even Zelter's device pitched in, lending a cryptic hint or two amid its usual nonsense. Bit by bit, the pieces fell into place, the puzzle transforming from an insurmountable challenge to a testament of their collective determination. As the final piece clicked into position, there was a moment of stunned silence, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Then slowly, the great machine began to whir into life, a symphony of motion and sound that resonated throughout the stadium. The shield wall, as if taking its cue, flickered one last time before stabilizing, its previously erratic glow smoothing into a steady, reassuring hum. The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound echoing through the stadium like a wave of triumph. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated victory, however fleeting it might be. Revo stood at the heart of it all, exhausted and exhilarated, his faith in humanity, and everything beyond, vindicated for at least one more day. "Well, look at that," he said, turning to his companions with a grin. "Turns out miracles do happen, or maybe the universe just got tired of screwing us over," Dara replied, her expression a blend of relief and disbelief. "Either way," Zelter said, his limbs draped casually over Revo's shoulders, "we're still here. And that's what matters," Max added, clapping Revo on the back with enough force to almost knock him over. As the storm subsided and the sun-like entity peeked through the clouds, the competitors stood together, united in their shared triumph. They were survivors, rebels against the odds, each of them a testament to the power of determination and the stubborn refusal to give in. And as Revo looked out over the stadium, at the faces of those who'd been part of this mad endeavor, he couldn't help but feel a strange, warming sense of hope. In the grand scheme of things, they were still at the mercy of a capricious universe. But for Revo, Calyx stood amidst the chaos, drenched and yet oddly cheerful. It was a talent, really, to smile when the universe seemed hell-bent on dropping a meteor on your head. The stadium was slowly descending into bedlam, a fitting tribute to the bureaucratic inefficiency it represented. A flickering shield wall threatened to give in at any moment, and the Glarion sky continued its impression of a malfunctioning rave with disturbing enthusiasm. "Well, look at this circus," Revo mused, as rainwater dripped from his eyelashes. "All we need now is a clown car." Beside him, Zelterquib, an alien who looked like someone had given an octopus a bad attitude and an extra set of limbs, let out a grunt of disapproval. "I still can't believe you humans are so optimistic. It's like a disease." "Nah," Revo said, a grin splitting his face. "It's strategic denial. Call it what you want. I'm keeping my expectations low." "Less disappointment that way." Revo clapped him on the back, almost losing his balance as Zelter's many limbs scrambled to steady him. "Well, if we pull this off, you'll have to come up with a new strategy, my friend." The games, prestigious as they were, seemed doomed to a spectacular failure. but Revo's proposal had lit a spark of intrigue among the gathered competitors. As they started forming into mixed species teams, there was a palpable undercurrent of skepticism and hope, the kind of hope you felt when betting your last credits on a three-legged horse in a space derby. Dara, trying to impose some semblance of order amidst the chaos, was already losing patience. Her voice cut through the noise, sharp and no nonsense. "All right, people, let's get some organization here. We don't have all day, or do we? Not unless you want to test how waterproof you really are," Max quipped, shaking the rain from his hair with a bitter laugh. The first challenge, a test of strength, was a logistical nightmare that seemed designed by someone who'd never actually met a living creature. Revo watched as competitors heaved and hauled at cumbersome weights, their grunts of exertion mingling with curses in 100 languages. "Whoever built this course was either a genius or a sadist," Max said, his muscles straining against the pull of gravity. "Probably both," Revo replied, as he helped a diminutive alien with a bright green mohawk scramble over a particularly treacherous patch of mud. "But hey, at least it's a bonding experience. I prefer bonding experiences that don't involve mud in places mud should never go," Dara muttered, untangling herself from a snarl of sentient wires that seemed intent on strangling her. Despite the madness, or perhaps because of it, the teams began to work together with a chaotic sort of grace. Alien and human, tentacled and not, they found an awkward rhythm that, surprisingly, didn't lead to any major casualties. Yet, the real test lay ahead, in the form of a massive, intricate puzzle that looked like it had been designed by a particularly vindictive AI. It loomed over them, taunting with its complexity and the promise of either salvation or further humiliation. "All right, folks," Revo called out. "This is it. This puzzle needs all our brain power, so if your brain's checked out, now's the time to wake it up, preferably with less caffeine and more cooperation." Zelter, standing alongside him, waved his alien device like a conductor ready to lead a most dissonant symphony. It was a hybrid of calculator and paperweight, but somehow, occasionally, it managed to spit out a useful hint. Like most things in life, it was mainly about trial and error, more error than trial. As the competitors worked together, something remarkable began to happen. Skills meshed in unexpected ways, creating a synergy that was as surprising as it was effective. It was almost enough to believe in miracles, until one of the puzzle's levers snapped off in Revo's hands. "Well," he said, holding up the broken piece like a trophy, "that's one way to solve a problem. Just break it." Max rolled his eyes. "We're trying not to smash our way through this one, remember," says the guy who almost punched a hole through that last obstacle. Dara shot back, her hands deftly working to connect a series of mismatched components. Zelter chuckled, a sound like gravel being ground underfoot. "You humans do have a unique approach to problem solving, mostly involving brute force. It's a compliment, right?" Revo asked, his grin never wavering. "Sure, let's call it that." Bit by bit, the puzzle's secrets unraveled, each piece falling into place with a satisfying click. The sense of camaraderie was almost infectious. Even the most skeptical competitors couldn't help but be swept up in the momentum. Finally, with a collective exhale, the last piece slotted into position. The great contraption groaned, shuddered, and then began to glow with a steady, reassuring hum. The shield wall, as if taking its cue, stabilized at last, casting a protective dome over the stadium that, for once, didn't look like it was about to short-circuit. A cheer rose up from the crowd, louder than the storm that still raged overhead. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered triumph, a rare thing in a universe more prone to indifference than miracles. "Would you look at that?" Revo said, as if he'd never doubted it for a second. "We might just live to see another absurd adventure, or we've just postponed our inevitable doom," Dara countered, though her voice held a note of pride. Zelter, draping several limbs over Revo's shoulders, nodded. "I have to admit, you humans do manage to surprise. Not sure if that's a compliment," Max observed, his own smile tempered with a healthy dose of skepticism. "It is," Zelter assured him. For now, as the storm began to wind down, the sun-like entity peeked through the clouds, bathing the stadium in a warm glow that felt almost deserved. The competitors, tired but jubilant, mingled together, celebrating their unexpected victory with a mixture of disbelief and relief. It was a rare moment of unity, a flickering light in a universe that thrived on chaos. Revo looked around, taking in the scene with a sense of satisfaction that was all the more potent for its fragility. "Here's to surviving another day," he said, raising an imaginary glass. "May our next disaster be slightly less apocalyptic." As the laughter swelled around them, Revo couldn't help but feel hopeful. Perhaps, just perhaps, they'd managed to do something truly extraordinary, and if not, at least they'd gone down swinging, with a grin and a grim joke at the ready. The universe, ever capricious, might have more in store for them, but for now, they'd carved out a small victory against the odds. And as any gambler would tell you, a win's a win, no matter how unlikely it seems. "What do you reckon comes next?" Max asked as they watched the sky finally clear. Revo shrugged, probably something worse, but that's tomorrow's problem. Always a pessimist, Dara said, rolling her eyes though her smile betrayed her amusement. Realist, Revo corrected, but even realists can have their moments. Like now, Zelter peered up at the sky, his features unreadable. And what about after? Revo laughed, a short, sharp sound. The universe spins, the chaos reigns, and we keep on dancing, one misstep at a time. As the last of the clouds dissipated, leaving behind a sky that seemed far less menacing, the stadium resonated with the sounds of celebration. It was a fleeting victory, but one that felt important nonetheless. Revo took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Here's to tomorrow's madness. May it bring its own brand of insanity, Zelter agreed, his voice tinged with something akin to warmth. As they stood there on the precipice of whatever lunacy awaited them next, Revo knew one thing for certain. Whatever came their way, they'd face it head-on, with humor, irreverence, and maybe just a little bit of luck. And in a universe as delightfully unpredictable as theirs, that was more than enough. The Glarion Stadium was still a glorified mess, but at least now it was a mess with a purpose. The rain had stopped, though the air still smelled of wet metal and desperation. The shield wall held steady for the moment, casting a tenuous glow over the assembled throng, a motley mix of humanity and alien kind, bonded by the shared insanity of the intergalactic games. Revo stood at the center of it all, feeling like the ringleader of a particularly unhinged circus. He glanced at Zelter, whose tentacles were busy fiddling with his hybrid calculator paperweight device. The alien looked skeptical, but that's what his face always looked like he was perpetually questioning the universe's choices. So, Revo said, clapping his hands to gather attention, anyone got ideas on how we stop this beautiful disaster from becoming a complete shitshow? Yeah, Max replied, running a hand through his rain-soaked hair. We could always pray, but I hear the gods are out to lunch. Can't imagine why they'd work for this salary anyway, Dara added. She was pacing around, trying to impose some semblance of order on the chaos. Got anything in that magic device of yours, Zelter? Zelter grumbled, his voice like a gravel avalanche. It's not magic, it's just alien technology. And yes, I might have something. Revo grinned, but before he could dig into Zelter's plan, a loud noise interrupted him, a klaxon blaring with the subtlety of a drunk uncle at a wedding. The final event was about to begin, and it promised to be as unforgiving as the rest. The teams, a patchwork quilt of species and skills, formed up with an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. The last challenge was a test of strategic acumen, requiring them to stabilize the flickering shield wall using whatever wits and resources they could cobble together. Revo didn't have much faith in the universe's fairness, but he did believe in his team's ability to conjure miracles out of mayhem. Humanity's talent for thriving amidst chaos would either save them or kill them, and wasn't that just the universe's idea of a punchline? All right, folks, Revo said, raising his voice over the din. We're going to tackle this puzzle like we tackle everything, with sheer bloody-minded determination and a dash of blind optimism, Zelter snorted. Human strategy at its finest. You know you love it, Revo shot back, elbowing his alien compatriot. The challenge required them to synchronize a series of control panels scattered across the stadium. Each panel was a knot of wires and alien logic, designed to test every ounce of ingenuity the teams possessed. It was like trying to defuse a bomb while blindfolded and drunk, which coincidentally was how Revo handled most of his problems. Let's split up, Dara suggested, ever the pragmatist. We'll cover more ground that way. Divide and conquer, Max said with a shrug. Or just divide and die. Either way sounds fun. With a shared sense of impending doom and a dark grin, they fanned out across the stadium. Revo headed toward one of the control panels, feeling adrenaline fizz through his veins. It was time to see just how far strategic denial could carry them. The first panel he encountered looked about as friendly as a cornered rat. Wires dangled menacingly, and a holographic interface flickered with an attitude that screamed, "Touch me and I'll bite." "All right, you bastard," Revo muttered, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's dance," he set to work, his fingers flying over the controls, trying to make sense of the alien symbology that might as well have been written in hieroglyphs for all the good it did him. Behind him, a crowd gathered, watching with the kind of morbid curiosity reserved for impending train wrecks. Zelter, who'd drifted over to join him, looked at the array of wires and sighed. "You humans might be immune to common sense, but this is something else." "Hey, never underestimate the power of ignorance," Revo quipped, not taking his eyes off the panel. "Or its ability to blow us all to hell," Zelter retorted, but he leaned in to help anyway. The two of them worked in a chaotic tandem, Revo's enthusiasm matched by Zelter's grumbling expertise. They were an unlikely duo, but they'd seen stranger things in this universe than a human and an alien octopus working together to save the day. As they worked, the sky above began to darken once more, clouds rolling in with the kind of foreboding you only got from cats and weather patterns. The shield wall flickered ominously, and Revo knew they were running against the clock. Dara, he called out, glancing around for their resident organizer. How's it looking on your end? Dara's voice came through the comms, crackling with static and irritation. Panel 6 is a nightmare, but we're making progress. Try not to blow anything up on your side. No promises, Revo replied cheerfully, earning a growl from Zelter. She wasn't joking about the explosion part, Zelter said, pointing to a particularly unstable-looking capacitor. Right, note to self, avoid launching us into orbit. Back at the first panel, Max was elbow-deep in wiring that looked distinctly like it had a mind of its own. You two lovebirds need a hand, he called, eyeing their tangled mess with something like pity. Got it covered, thanks, Revo said, though he knew Max's help would probably save them a solid 5 minutes. Suit yourself, just make sure you keep those limbs attached. With Max's warning ringing in his ears, Revo returned his focus to the panel, ignoring the trickle of sweat on his brow. The wires were a stubborn puzzle, but Revo had never met a challenge he couldn't charm or punch his way through. Zelter, meanwhile, was muttering to himself in a language that sounded like a dying lawnmower. If we just reroute these circuits here. Got it, Revo said, snapping a wire into place with a flourish. I think. The panel sparked, and Revo barely had time to duck as a flare of light shot past his face. Whoa, almost got a space tan. Zelter's expression was unreadable, but Revo liked to think he was impressed. You're insane, thanks, it's my best feature. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of finessing circuits with the delicacy of a drunken surgeon, the panel emitted a satisfying chime. The lights blinked in unison, signaling their success. 1 down, 7 to go, Revo declared, wiping his brow with a grin. The victory, small as it was, renewed their spirits. Around the stadium, other teams were making similar headway, their efforts bearing fruit in fits and starts. It was a fragile coalition, bound together by necessity and a shared desire not to be vaporized. Revo moved on to the next panel, his mind whirring with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The challenge was far from over, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope that they might just pull this off. Of course, that's when the universe decided to throw a wrench in the works. A distant rumble echoed across the stadium, and Revo's heart plummeted. What now? Dara's voice came over the comms, clipped with urgency. We've got a problem. One of the shield's power cells is about to blow. Great, just what we need. We need someone to stabilize it, Dara continued. Manually, the implication hung in the air, and Revo felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. Someone would have to go in there and risk everything to keep the shield wall from collapsing entirely. Max looked at him, his expression grave. You thinking what I'm thinking? Revo nodded, his mind made up. Yeah, I am. You're gonna play the hero, aren't you? Zelter asked, though he already knew the answer. Someone's got to, Revo said, trying for levity and landing somewhere closer to resignation. And besides, heroes never die, they just get slightly singed. The plan was simple, in the way that surviving a supernova was simple. Get to the power cell, stabilize it, and try not to die in the process. Easy enough if you didn't think about it too hard. All right, let's do this, Revo said, steeling himself for the task ahead. If I don't make it, tell my mom I loved her, and that I still owe her 20 credits. You're insane, Zelter repeated, shaking his head, but there was a note of something else in his voice, a reluctant admiration that Revo pretended not to notice. Revo made his way through the chaos, heart pounding like a war drum. The power cell loomed ahead, an ominous presence that thrummed with barely contained energy. It was like standing next to a sleeping dragon, praying it wouldn't wake up and roast you alive. He approached it with caution, mindful of the crackling energy that danced in the air. The panel was a maze of switches and dials, each one a potential death sentence if handled improperly. Here goes nothing, Revo muttered, hands hovering over the controls. He took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of focus and determination he had. This was no time for second-guessing. As he worked, he felt the world narrow to a single point of concentration. Nothing existed but the panel and the task at hand. The universe held its breath, waiting to see if he would succeed or if everything would go up in a blaze of glory. The controls were stubborn, resisting his attempts to coerce them into submission, but Revo was nothing if not persistent, and he refused to let a little thing like imminent death get in his way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he heard the reassuring hum of the power cell stabilizing. The shield wall flickered, then solidified, its glow steady and unwavering. Did it, Revo said, his voice barely more than a whisper. We did it. The relief that washed over him was overwhelming, and he slumped against the panel, exhaustion catching up with him at last. Around him, the stadium erupted into cheers, the sound a balm for his frayed nerves. You mad bastard, Zelter said, his voice crackling over the comms. You actually pulled it off. Yeah, Revo replied, a weary grin spreading across his face. Guess I did. As he made his way back to his team, he was met with slaps on the back and words of congratulations. Even Dara, who generally treated praise like it was a rare commodity, offered him a nod of approval. "You did good, Revo," she said, her smile small but genuine. "Thanks." "I try," Max clapped him on the shoulder, a grin splitting his face. "You're a legend, you know that." "Maybe," Revo replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Just glad we made it through." The storm had passed, and with it the threat of total annihilation. The stadium was still a mess, but it was a mess that they'd survived together. It was a victory, however small, and it felt damn good. Revo looked around at the assembled crowd, feeling a sense of camaraderie that was rare in a universe that thrived on chaos. For a moment, they'd come together and defied the odds, proving that even the most mismatched teams could achieve the impossible. "Here's to surviving another day," Revo said, raising an imaginary glass in salute to the universe's twisted sense of humor. And to whatever madness comes next. The laughter that followed was genuine, a shared appreciation for the absurdity of their lives. They'd faced the storm and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. It was a small triumph in a universe that had little time for heroes and even less for happy endings, but it was their triumph, and that made all the difference. As they stood there, basking in the glow of their victory, Revo knew that whatever the future held, they'd face it with humor, irreverence, and maybe just a little bit of luck. And in a universe as delightfully unpredictable as theirs, that was more than enough. The aftermath of their little escapade was a sight to behold. The stadium, despite having survived, looked like a parade float after a hurricane. Bits of debris littered the field, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and bad decisions. Revo and his ragtag team stood in the center of it all, basking in their unexpected victory, because if you didn't celebrate surviving a potential explosive death, what did you celebrate? Revo scratched at the back of his neck, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished settle in. Well, that was something. Zelter, looking like someone had just told him the universe's biggest joke, waved a tentacle. "Something ridiculous is more like it. You humans are full of surprises, mostly unpleasant ones. Hey, if we're not making your life interesting, we're not doing our job," Revo replied with a grin. He was still buzzing with adrenaline, a strange kind of euphoria that came from not being dead. Zelter snorted, a sound like a deflating balloon. "Interesting isn't quite the word I'd use, but sure, let's go with that." Dara approached, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "You do realize you just saved the games, right?" "Yeah, well," Revo shrugged, trying to hide the pride creeping up his cheeks. "Couldn't let all those gamblers down, could we?" Max joined them, his hair still looking like he'd been caught in a rainstorm, which, given Glarion's meteorological quirks, wasn't far from the truth. "You know, I was thinking maybe we should start praying to new gods. The old ones clearly have a vendetta against us, or they're just bored," Zelter suggested. "I'd be bored if I were a god and had to watch this circus." "Well, you can bet the Intergalactic Committee's gonna have a field day with this," Dara said, crossing her arms. "Humans saving the day, they'll be talking about it for centuries." "Centuries, more like until the next big disaster," Revo said. "Which, knowing our luck, is probably next week." As they spoke, the diverse array of aliens, who had gathered to witness what they all thought was going to be a spectacular failure, began to converge around them. Faces that had once been skeptical were now filled with a newfound, albeit grudging, respect. An alien that looked like it had been crossbred with a hedgehog shuffled forward. "Humans," it said, its voice a gravelly murmur. "You are unpredictable. That's one way to put it," Revo agreed. "We're also really bad at dying, bit of a survival instinct." The hedgehog alien nodded, its spines rattling. "We could use that." "Use what, our charming personalities or our irrational optimism?" Zelter asked. "Both," the alien replied, surprisingly earnest. "Perhaps there is strength in chaos." Revo shared a glance with his crew. "Well, that's humanity in a nutshell. Strength in chaos and all that." The tournament, which had been teetering on the brink of calamity, managed to conclude without further incident. With the shield wall stabilized, the games could carry on. There were races, tests of strength, displays of technology that would make a human's head spin, and yet all eyes kept drifting back to the human contingent. They were celebrities now, the survivors of a cosmic joke. As the dust settled, Revo found himself standing beside Zelter, watching as the final event unfolded. It was a test of strategic acumen, a battle of wits rather than brawn, and for once Revo was content to be a spectator. "You think they'll remember us?" Revo asked, more curious than concerned. "They'll remember you," Zelter said, a note of something almost like fondness in his voice. "You and your ridiculous optimism. It's infectious." "Well, better than a space plague, right?" "Arguably," Zelter conceded. "Though I did hear some of the other aliens discussing forming alliances with humans." Revo blinked. "Really? Really? They figure if you can survive this mess, you might survive the next one too. Guess we're more useful than we look," Revo said, feeling a swell of pride. Zelter's many eyes regarded him with something that might have been amusement. "Don't let it go to your head. You're insufferable enough as it is. Wouldn't dream of it." Revo replied, though he couldn't quite keep the grin off his face. Around them, the games drew to a close, species mingling in a way that was rare and beautiful in its oddness. Revo watched as humans and aliens alike shook hands, exchanged stories, and made plans for future collaborations. It was a small step, a tentative bridge between worlds, but it was something. Dara joined them, looking unusually relaxed. "We've done something here, haven't we?" "Yes," Revo agreed, feeling the weight of their achievement. "We've shown them that maybe we're not so different after all, or at least that we're equally capable of screwing things up," Zelter added. "That too," Revo laughed. Max, appearing out of nowhere like he always did, chimed in. "Think there's more where this came from?" "God, I hope not," Revo said, though there was an undertone of excitement in his voice. "But if there is, I suppose we'll tackle it the same way we tackle everything else, with blind optimism and a disregard for personal safety," Max asked. "You know it," Revo replied. As they stood there, surrounded by the echoes of the games and the murmurs of newfound respect, Revo felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about embracing the chaos and finding strength in it. "To whatever madness comes next," he said, raising an imaginary glass once more. The laughter that followed was genuine, a shared appreciation for the absurdity of their lives. They'd faced the storm and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. And in a universe that was as delightfully unpredictable as theirs, that was more than enough to keep going. So as they watched the sun-like entity of Glarion dip below its horizon, casting the stadium in a warm, otherworldly glow, Revo knew that whatever the future held, they'd face it with humor, irreverence, and maybe just a little bit of luck. In a universe with a cruel sense of humor, perhaps that was the best anyone could ask for.